Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good evening. My name is Brandy Shufatinsky, and I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement with the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values. And we're so glad that you joined us tonight, this evening, as we discuss the politicization of the classroom from radical roots to government mandate. I'm looking forward to our conversation with this amazing group of speakers. And before we start, I want to remind you all to please put your questions in the chat, and we're going to get to as many as we can. Also, when you have a chance, please take a look at our website. You can find more about who we are and why we join together and what we do. You can also find our recently released report that provides details on exactly why we're concerned about radical ethnic studies taking a hold of our K-12 education system. I'd also like to thank Daniel Newman, who's working behind the scenes, making sure everything goes smoothly tonight. And also give a thank you to Jennifer Richmond, the co-founder of the Institute for Liberal Values. Jen's been working tirelessly for months putting this coalition together and organizing everything for tonight. So now I'd like to introduce Alina Kaplan, who's the president of the Alliance for Constructive Ethnic Studies. Hi, Alina. I'm glad that you can join us. I want you to, if you can, please give kind of a general overview of concerns over the politicization of education, and also why you feel it's so important for the Alliance for Constructive Ethnic Studies to have joined our coalition.
Great. Thank you, Brandy, and thank you very much for moderating this important discussion. I am super excited to be here with all of you, and I am very honored to join this esteemed panel of speakers. I'm going to jump right in with a few examples of what we mean by the politicization of the classroom, a trend that has been happening with alarming acceleration in the past few years. So Daniel, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and pull up some PowerPoint slides so we can look at examples. Let's go to the second one. Okay, so here are a couple of examples of what we mean in K through 12 curricula in general. There is what many are calling a revamping of US history that's going on. So for example, in the student outcomes of the San Mateo Unified High School District in California, what we have is the following. What you see in the purple has been removed, the part that says understand the founding ideals of American democracy and the role of government in people's lives. Students will be able to trace how they've changed over 150 years. And that very foundational student outcome has been replaced with the things that you see in the red. Analyze power structures throughout modern American history and being empowered to challenge outdated dominant narratives that reinforce hegemony in modern American history. So it starts to give you a feel of this revamping of curricula that's going on. Let's go to the next one. Daniel, next slide, please. Okay, this one is an example from STEM, from mathematics, actually, so not even humanities. And some quotes here are from a framework that was adopted by the Seattle Public Schools a few years ago. And here, educators, so this is a framework that has been adopted by the school system. Educators must identify and challenge the ways that math is used to uphold capitalist, imperialist, and racist views. Math has been and continues to be used to oppress and marginalize people in communities of color. White supremacy shows up when we insist on the right answer or when a teacher asks students to show their work. Using money in teaching fractions upholds capitalist and imperialist ways of being. And some characteristics of white supremacy culture, there's a long list of them, but a few of them that are listed are individualism, objectivity, and meritocracy. How does this play out? Well, first of all, this is one of the tangible ways that it's playing out is that this one is in Seattle. In California, for example, where similar framework has been adopted, we have just this year removed accelerated tracks and advanced math, have removed them altogether. Some of this stuff sounds kind of crazy, so if you would like more information, we would be happy to provide more information on this. Okay, Daniel, let's go to the next slide. So now we get to ethnic studies. And ethnic studies is an example of curricula that is both an example and one that is driving a lot of changes in places like math and places like history in the overall curriculum. At ACES, the Alliance for Constructive Ethnic Studies, of which I'm the president, we believe that ethnic studies should do probably what all of you believe it should do. So it should build bridges of understanding, it should build empathy, mutual respect, it should emphasize contributions and accomplishments of ethnic groups, it should discuss how ethnic groups have fought for equality, what work remains to be done, how can we address remaining racism and other bigotry together, and how have they been overcome in the past. And we should be encouraging open inquiry and openness to different perspectives so that we can learn from each other. This is probably along the lines of what one would think. Let's go to the next slide. So that is consistent with a California law that said we're going to prepare students to be global citizens with an appreciation for the contributions of multiple cultures. Now, what's interesting about this is that it is the same kind of innocuous language that is popping up all over the country. And I would say that we're talking about over 20 states that are now looking at different aspects of ethnic studies and bringing them in. In California, it is now a mandated subject in high school. But they start out with this very innocuous language, very positive sounding language. And then we get to, next slide, please, the following. So we get to a subject called Liberated Ethnic Studies, a particular brand of ethnic studies, where, for example, objectives for students in grades 3 to 6 are to understand and critique the relationship between white supremacy, racism, anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity, xenophobia, patriarchy, cis-heteropatriarchy, capitalism, ableism, and so on and so forth, where capitalism is actually made equivalent to white supremacy, racism, and so on. And yes, this is for third through sixth graders. One of the principles is to challenge imperialist and colonial hegemonic beliefs and practices on multiple levels. Now, while this does sound like gobbledygook and is sometimes hard to take seriously, for some of us at least, what can't be taken seriously enough is the following. Let's go to the next slide. So here's a chart that is provided. This is part of that branded Liberated Ethnic Studies, and this is actually taught. This is an assignment in districts that shows, that has students enter their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, their national origin, their physical, emotional, developmental ability, and their religion or spiritual affiliation. And based on those things, they are to say, they are to label if they are an agent or target of oppression. So not only are we asking them to label themselves with these different aspects of their identity, but we're now making sure that they put themselves into either an oppressor box or an oppressed box. Let's go to the next slide. Let's keep going to the next one. We'll just speed up a little. Okay, here's an example of what really gives you the fundamentals of what we're talking about. We're talking about liberated ethnic studies. That is a picture of the seminal text with a rifle and pencil on top. And I'll leave it to your imagination what imagery, what concepts that evokes, that imagery evokes. Let's go to the next one. Here's a diagram from teacher training that shows at its roots or at the center settler colonialism and these different things that are white supremacy, God, religion, private property, patriarchy, genocide, all on equal footing around the settler colonialism center. Let's go to the next one. And when asked, well, doesn't this kind of sound like we're pushing a particular ideology? Teachers are told that they need to be grounded in the correct politics to educate students. This is an exact quote from that training. Next one. Next slide. Some examples in another there we go. Some examples in another lesson in several districts, actually, that talk about the focus on hegemony, power, oppression. So, hegemony is where school exerts control and dominance. This is done through four-star ideology. Students are asked to talk about what role does school play in making us act oppressively or want to be oppressors, and so on. Next slide, please. And let's go to the next one, just in the interest of time. Okay, so one thing that is really helpful to understand is by looking to understand an ideology is to look at the role models that that ideology holds up. And so what we see consistently in these curricula are a consistent choice of Marxist militants. So for example, we elevate a person like Oscar Lopez Rivera, who led a paramilitary Marxist organization responsible for over 100 bombings in the US. But last slide, let's go to the next one. Here's who's in and who's out. Who's in are these types of militants that I just listed. In 154 important historical models, role models that are people of color, who is omitted, however, is Dr. Martin Luther King, John Lewis, Thurgood Marshall, and other peaceful leaders. And civil rights leaders are described as passive and docile. Dr. Clarence Jones, who is a speechwriter and advisor to MLK, wrote about this type of curriculum. I write in a plea for moral reasoning and decency and for a respect for truth and accuracy. So just as Dr. Jones was compelled to speak out, so are many of us. That's why ACES, the Alliance for Constructive Ethnic Studies, was formed. And that is why this coalition for empowered education was formed as well. And I hope you enjoyed listening to the perspectives from our various speakers that are part of this coalition. Brandy?
Thank you so much, Alina. I want to remind everybody that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or in the comment section, and we're going to get to them after the speakers. So next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Eric Smith, who's the president and co-founder of Free Black Thought and also a professor of rhetoric. Hi, Eric. Oh, I think you're muted. Let's fix that.
Great.
Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay. How you doing?
Doing all right. How about you?
I'm all right. I'm good.
All right. So we'd love to hear, similar to Alina, why you think it's so important to be a part of this coalition and why Free Black Thought's joining.
Well, it's important because Black students, minority students in general are being used. They're being used for an agenda they have nothing to do with. They're being used because they are the most salient tool for transforming society. Why? Because if you educate them that society is indeed against them, that it is indeed inherently evil, they will grow up to be the kind of person who can help topple this society. The critical theorist Herbert Marcuse was all about this idea that we're too happy. Nobody's going to revolt. Happy people don't revolt. Upset people revolt, right? So we have to make these people upset. And we can do that best with the kids who are still malleable, not with the adults who, that's a taller order to try to convince them that they hate their own lives. So I don't like this fact that, minorities in general, but in this particular situation, students are being used for this. This is disempowering. This education that Alina just described is disempowering for the current situation we have, the current system we have. One founded on classical liberal values, a capitalistic one, is very disempowering. However, it's very empowering for something more aligned with Marxist thought, socialist thought. So the issue is, how do we educate these kids to topple society when they're old enough to do so? And this is what I have a huge problem with. I think the ideas that people like Tima Okun, Raman DiAngelo, others, I think the issues they have with some tried and true habits of mind: curiosity, critical thinking, analytical thinking, resilience, self-reliance. All these things are good for this society, right? If you're trying to upset people, if you're trying to get people to look at the world and say, oh my God, what's going on here? You don't teach them those things so that they grow up to be maladapted to the society. And then you go to them and say, doesn't this suck? Don't you want to revolt? Right? These habits of mind are key. Now, there are a lot of people who say, we should take ideology out of the classroom. The curriculum should not be ideological. Well, it is ideological if you consider classical liberal values an ideology, right? The primacy of reason, right? Individualism, self-reliance, and then later on private property and things like that. Those are ideological. The thing is, that's an ideology that best ensures happiness and success in this current system. Now, you can teach those things, right? And you may be indoctrinating, quote unquote, but you're indoctrinating in a way that is that can best ensure self-actualization, fulfillment, and things like that. The problem is when you teach these habits of mind and say, okay, now use them for this specific purpose. That purpose being to topple society, to rid the world of this particular hegemony, right? And put something else in its place. When you teach them these habits of mind, that's one thing. If they want to go off and do, social justice activism or something like that, so be it, right? But that's their choice. When you say learn these so that you can topple society, that is indoctrination. That is not education. And that's what's happening right now. I should tell you that I've been up for 15 hours and all I've had is a granola bar. So I'm a little hangry right now. I should probably stop here before I really start going off the rails. So there it is.
Thanks, Eric. We have a couple of questions, more than a couple right now already, but we'll get to them at the end, if that's fine. All right, so next we're going to hear from David Smolansky. He's going to speak to us about his experiences as an exiled mayor from Venezuela, who's worked with the Victims of Communism organization, where he's shared his story. So hi, David. We're really excited to have you here and to hear from you and hear about your experiences living under communism and Marxist regimes. And I'd like it if you can touch a little bit on what brought you here and also why you think it's very important to be part of this coalition.
Well, thank you so much, Brandy, for the opportunity, and thank you, Institute for Liberal Values, for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be here and to talk a little bit about not only my experience, but what Venezuelans are facing now, and what we have been facing during the last 25 years. As Brandy mentioned, I'm in exile now. I'm living in exile in the U.S. Since 2017. I was a mayor there of a district that its name is El Hatillo, which is part of the capital, Caracas. And because of the policies that I was implementing, not only on reducing crime, tackling corruption, but also promoting an education that is diverse, that is plural, that is should not be used as a tool of social control or ideology that the regime wanted to implement. I was illegally removed from office. I am under an illegal arrest warrant, and I was forced to flee my country after being 35 days in hiding. And one of the things that we started to live in Venezuela when the regime started 25 years ago is how in that moment Hugo Chavez, who was the founder of the so-called Bolivarian revolution, that now Maduro is the ruler of my country, one of the first things that he wanted to change drastically, apart from stay more years in power and censorship the media, was the education. Education since the beginning was used for the regime, as I said, as a tool of social control. The change of the curriculum to promote the communism ideology, or what he called the socialism of the 21st century, which is the same as the communism of the 20th century, that need to be learned on many schools, especially public schools, and how also, on a very perverse way, the regime started to deny funds to support public education to every level, primary, high school, and universities. Actually, my activism started as a leader of a student movement that we founded a long time ago in 2007, because a part that the main TV station in that moment was shut down, and I was a student of journalism, and many of us thought in that moment that, well, this is a huge attack to the freedom of expression, which of course it was, but also for the opportunity for us to get a job, and our human rights were violated. Also, in that moment, we went to the streets and we protested non-violently, because many universities, the public ones, were not having the funds that they really needed according to the law to work properly, and also the autonomy of the university in Venezuela have been progressively lost. Just to give you an example, a good friend of mine, who was a professor of me when I started my Master's of Political Science in Venezuela, and he's a PhD of history, of Venezuelan history. For teaching class today, he's only earning monthly $4. That's what professors in Venezuela are paid now, $4 monthly, even though you get a PhD. So that is the perverse way of these regimes, especially communist regimes, to basically kill progressively the education system, not only through the imposition of its ideology, but at the same time denying the resources that a professor needs to teach, or the university needs for their maintenance on every level. So now Venezuela, incredibly, has suffered the biggest migration and refugee crisis in the history of the Americas. Almost 8 million people have fled Venezuela. This is something that is not well known, but more people have fled Venezuela than Syria, and Syria have been under a war for more than a decade. Venezuela have not been under a formal war during these years. Only this compared to Ukraine, and many people have fled, especially young people, because they don't have opportunities to study. There's very small opportunities for people to study in Venezuela. Moreover, according to the World Food Program of the United Nations, 9.3 million people are suffering from starvation, which is the fourth biggest population in the world under these circumstances, and the first in the Western Hemisphere. All of this is a consequence of this so-called, or the called socialist regime, that it believes in equality, but as soon as they believe in equality as if everyone is poor. So that's the quality that they believe. They don't believe that people could just go study, and then find a job, and then left behind that extreme conditions and become people that are part of the middle class, and they could go and access to services, to a private property, whatever. So That's the tragedy that we're living. Hundreds of thousands of the people that have fled, of course, are young people who are supposed to be studying in primaries or high school, that now finding schools in Colombia, Peru, Ecuador. But the most dramatic thing is the people that are suffering from starvation, which is huge, especially the kids and teenagers. And we are about to lose a generation, basically, because they are not eating 3 times a day. And the regime use this situation to also as a tool of social control. For example, providing boxes of food, which is not a balanced food, which many of the products that are provided are expired, and this is causing even worse consequences that not eating 3 times a day. So it's a very perverse regime that we are facing in my country, and it is a shame, because we have seen so many Venezuelans that are doing greatly overseas after they fled the countries, that they have been able to study in great universities, for example, where I am in the United States, after years of a lot of effort, that they're doing great things in other countries in Latin America. Many of the professors that were only earning $4 a month in Venezuela, they are now professors in good universities in other part of the region where they're earning what they should. But also many of them have not been able to teach again, because they have to survive. And some of them, from being a PhD professor in one of the best universities in Venezuela, now they are Uber drivers, or they are working as a bartender, or whatever they could do as overseas to survive and to help their families that are still in Venezuela. So what we need to understand, and with this I'm going to end, is that when a regime wants to undermine democracy, because the biggest lesson for us in Venezuela, after being one of the most prosperous democracies during the 20th century, is that democratic tools were used to destroy democracy. And when those democratic tools are used to destroy democracy, is a free education. So the education is something that authoritarians always look up to control, and to use as a tool of propaganda, as a tool of ideology, where millions are affected, where unfortunately some of them, or plenty of them, when they start having those classes, believe, and then the consequences are tragic, as the one I have explained in Venezuela. 9.3 billion people living on starvation, almost 8 million people have fled the country, and professors earning $4 a day, and many young Venezuelans, especially kids and teenagers, on the public system, receiving classes with a lot of ideology. For example, with books with Hugo Chavez on the cover, and things that try to remake history, as some of the examples as we saw at the beginning of this conference that are happening in the US. Well, we suffer from that also in Venezuela, and that's something very, very dangerous for our society. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, David. I think it's important for people to hear firsthand from somebody who's actually gone through a bit of what we're seeing happen in our public schools today. Thank you for sharing. Next, we're going to hear from Wei Chen. Wei was the president of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance of Greater New York, and Wei has been instrumental in numerous battles supporting meritocracy and education. It's great to see you, Wei. Thanks for joining us. Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
I'm muted.
Oh. Here we go.
Okay. Thank you, Brandy, and thank you, ILV. This is wonderful to get this kind of discussion going on, because we have critical issues that are going on. Yes, meritocracy is one of the things that we must have to have a functioning society. And when it's under attack by this kind of illiberal liberated studies, you know that we're in deep, deep trouble. Meritocracy is what guarantees that you do not have tyranny. Otherwise, anybody could choose people for whatever ridiculous reasons to be put in positions where they do not belong. So, meritocracy in education, in particular, we're talking about education, is where you teach people that if you work hard and you do the right thing, you should be able to proceed in life. But what's happening is that we have an opposition to that in this kind of study, where they want to pit one group of people against another. So talking first about groups, that's the individualism that we were talking about, that is critical again to our concept of what freedom and self-definition is. If we do not have that kind of ability to be individual, but you're going to be considered lumped together as a group, you will not be able to be judged by your own merit. And that has found itself in our fights over here in these specialized high schools in New York City, as well as the magnet schools from one coast to the other coast, from Boston's exam schools to Lowell in San Francisco to Thomas Jefferson in Virginia. We have that same problem where they're trying to say we want to have groups of kids as opposed to individual kids who can do the work, who have the desire to do the work and have the commitment to do the work. So that is part of what America is built on. It is part of the American dream to be able to say, I come to America, I may have nothing, and I will be able to do something by my own commitment, ability, and hard work. So that's what's at stake here. It's a very big thing for the liberated studies to come in and say, let's use the critical theory. And they may change the names, one day it's going to be critical race theory, another time it's going to be social emotional learning, but it's the same kind of thing where they try to unravel the kinds of bonds that people have, what unifies us, but try to divide us into more and more pieces, and then give arbitrary designations. How is it that Asians are going to be called, when it's convenient, white adjacent? And so you suddenly become, even though you may be the poorest group in, for example, in New York City, it happens that Asians have the highest poverty level. All of a sudden, you become white adjacent because you happen to believe in meritocracy. That is a problem in so many ways that we can hardly begin to try to figure out how do we dig ourselves out of this. So for the Asians, a lot of them have gone through some of the same problems that David Smolansky just talked about in communism, where you have the inability to have the kind of life that you would want to have despite the preparation. And also going beyond that, it's the classification. What group do you fall into? Certainly in different parts of the world, we saw it in Russia, we saw it in Venezuela, in Cuba, in China, where you have groups of people being judged by their class. And here we're taking class, the Marxist class, it's just turned into race and into other areas that depending on what people feel like. And this is one of the amazing things about liberated studies. We could redefine it at any point to groups that are in favor and groups that are out of favor, and not by what you do in a individual achievement way. That concerns us because once you start teaching this in the schools, that we're going to judge people by their groups, that extends itself outside of the room. It's outside of the schoolroom, and we've seen it happen more and more now, where people are being attacked. Jews are being attacked. Of course, anti-Semitism has increased, and in Asian attacks against Asians have also increased, and that's by other groups. I'm not saying within one's group, and this is something that is being actually fostered by this kind of mentality that we must judge people by their groups. by characteristics that are not related to what that individual is, but what the group is. That's why I think it's important for us to pull back from this kind of toxic, divisive education and restore what is meaningful for the long-term good of our society. We could talk more about this on meritocracy and the specifics, but Brandy, I give it back to you.
Thanks so much, Wei. Well, yeah, I'm sure we will get to the conversation and questions about meritocracy and how the attacks on meritocracy are playing out for students. So thank you. Thanks for sharing. So our last speaker tonight's David Bernstein, the founder of the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values and author of Woke Antisemitism, How a Progressive Ideology Harms Jews. Hey, David, how's it going? You're also muted. Everyone's muted. There we go. Oh,
wait, there we go. It's good to see you.
You too. Long time no see. So can you I guess just tell everyone why you find it so important to stand together against the type of ideology we're seeing creep its way into K-12 education, and more specifically how it's how that ideology is helping to fuel anti-Semitism?
Yeah, so when ethnic studies was first introduced into California, the first drafts of it were just an absolute train wreck. It had song lyrics that suggested Jews control the media. It likened the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, which is a highly radical and liberal movement, to the Black Lives Matter and Me Too movements in the United States. It had a fact sheet that suggested that Jews were white, and if Jews challenged that idea that they were white, that is a white supremacist and Nazi concept. So you can imagine, and by the way, it openly disparaged many Jewish organizations and called them Zionists in nature. They might be Zionists, but it treated Zionism as a pejorative, the national liberation movement of the Jewish people as a pejorative. So it got off on the wrong foot, to say the least. Of course, some of those really blatant aspects of the curriculum were later partially sanitized. But what you found was when the model curriculum was passed by California, it was built upon the foundation of what's called critical consciousness. It's one of the two key values undergirding the curriculum. Critical consciousness, the idea of critical consciousness is sort of to recognize and resist systems of oppression. So they claim to know exactly who the oppressed people are and who the oppressors, and they're teaching students, a generation of students, to resist these systems of oppression. And of course, they're taught to believe that America is a systematically oppressive place, Israel's a systematically oppressive place, and the like. It's a way of indoctrinating kids into a single worldview, a single paradigm. And of course, whenever you indoctrinate kids to think in this sort of very divisive, stark division of oppressed versus oppressor, it's very easy to look at Jews and Asians and other groups, successful groups in society, as being complicit in that repression. And that's in a sense what they are trying to get across. The curriculum, the Liberated Ethnic Studies curriculum today, these are the same folks that introduced that original train wreck in the first draft that was eventually repudiated. They're now signing contracts with certain school districts around California, and they're even getting their curriculum in other school districts around the United States. And very often they look at the United States and Israel as settler colonialist states. Dan, if you could put up that slide. As you see here, this is an actual slide from a curriculum that's used in a couple key cities, and it's meant to show how settler colonialism operates. Settler colonialism is this idea that indigenous populations are being replaced through genocide and colonialism, and it's not just a historical explanation. It's a way of sort of categorizing countries today. So even if one time you could have argued that America was a settler colonial state, it looks at America today, modern day America, as being a settler colonial state and hence illegitimate. And similarly, as you can see here in the way that Israel's depicted, I mean, it's a completely ridiculous map of Israel and makes no sense, but it is portrayed as a settler colonial state is in the upper left-hand corner. So you can see this is not just a historical understanding, but it is a comprehensive solution. Dan, you can go ahead and take a comprehensive explanation for why the world is the way it is. So you can imagine if you're a Jewish parent, or you might be concerned about how your kids are going to fare in such a classroom. You've taught them that they have family in Israel. They visited Israel with their family. They believe Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, and here they are being put into a public school classroom that tells them that their country is illegitimate, that their national idea has no merit, and should be obliterated from the map. That's what's happening in some California classrooms and in other classrooms. And I think we can understand that, Jews are often the canary in the coal mine. This doesn't stop with the Jewish community. When you have such a stark ideological division between oppressed and oppressors, it always leads to more and other forms of dogma. Dogma begets more extreme forms of dogma. And I think what you're going to see here, if this doesn't stop, if we're not able to put a stop to it, and thankfully we're able to work with some of our great coalition partners that are with us this evening. If we can't put a stop to this, we're going to be indoctrinating an entire generation to see the world in this way. It is not the kind of society in which minority groups thrive. It is an illiberal society, and that is what these ideologues who are pushing for radical ethnic studies are trying to create. And so I'm delighted to be able to work with other very thoughtful people and trying to turn the tide against this. And I'm confident that if we can band together, we can create this sort of groundswell of opposition to this form of ethnic studies and rather support a more moderate, thoughtful, inclusive, constructive form of ethnic studies. We can put a stop to this madness. So thank you for having me as part of this conversation.
Thanks, David. I want to thank you, David, and thank all of our speakers. And before we move to Q&A, I want to remind everybody, please visit our website so you can get more information on who we are, what we're doing, and also how to contact us. I also want to kind of let you know that we formed this coalition, the Coalition for Empowered Education, not only out of our concern, but also because we know how important it is to take proactive steps when it comes to educating future generations. And although very loud voices have been dominating the discourse over the past few years, we're living proof that those loud voices don't speak for all of us, and they don't accurately represent our communities. Our kids deserve more than becoming the rope used in a partisan tug of war, and that's why we're all here. So I think with that, we can get to some of the questions that some people have put in the comments. So the first question that I saw is, will we obtain information on where these examples are coming from, which training? And Alina, I think that's in reference to the slides you had.
Yeah, I'll take that one, Brandy. So I'm going to put in here my email address, and people are welcome to email me to ask for the information. So it's alina@calastudies.org. And also, if you go to our website, you can see a lot of these examples there as well. This is the ACES website. Brandy, I think I'll also take one other question that's a quick one that I saw somewhere there about somebody asked if Martin Luther King is now in the ESMC, the Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum, and it depends on what you mean by in. MLK is in only in passing mention in the context of United Mine Workers. There's nothing about, there's no studying of MLK or the Civil Rights Movement. He's just mentioned in a very random passing way. And again, in the Liberated Ethnic Studies curriculum, that it's even worse than that. So that's a short answer.
I'm going to add and make it a little slightly longer answer. The issue with MLK and others being left out of the original curriculum isn't solved by just adding them on. The question we need to actually understand is, why were they left out to begin with? What was the purpose in excluding those voices, those strong leaders of times past to begin with? Because they weren't left out accidentally. They were left out because their ideology did not align with the ideology that liberated ethnic studies activists are pushing. And that's a more important question that I believe our kids deserve an answer to. So with that, I want to go on to another one. Someone asked, well, somebody made a comment. I hope the speakers can be more accurate. Asians aren't being called white adjacent because they believe in meritocracy, but because meritocratic advancement is not applied to everyone.
Could I answer that one?
Please.
I don't think that you can say that meritocracy doesn't apply to everyone. It applies, but there may be different outcomes. If people think about equality as only equal outcomes, that's wrong. It should be that equality relates to equal rights. So we all have the right to do something, but it doesn't guarantee an same outcome. I forget who it was who said that when you're aiming for equal outcomes to the lowest common denominator, yes, you could get equality that way, but it's not good for society. We saw how it worked out in all of the communist countries, where when they said that we're going to really live by a Marxist society, you can either fall into Cambodia, where you had 2/7 of the people being killed as they went back to ground zero. They went to backwards in that kind of life because they wanted to have everybody equal. Or you could say that there are going to be some people who are better at certain skills, even in a family, even in your own family. If you have siblings, you know that there are some kids who are going to be better in one area versus another. One may be a better cook and the other may be a better carpenter. That doesn't make them any worse than the other, but there is merit at play there. And if we say that no, everybody's going to eat food made by the one who doesn't know how to make food and sit on chairs made by the one who doesn't know how to make chairs, that does not do good for society. And so the adjacency, as that is being called, is really by whatever they feel like saying. That is one of the arbitrariness about the terms. I think we have to be very, very careful about how terms are being bandied around. So when they say that anti-racism and racism, you have to go and figure out what are they trying to say. It's partly to get you off balance that they keep on changing the names and the terms. And so if you are serious about trying to keep track of what these so-called educators are doing, a lot of it is trying to confuse. And when you're confused, that's better for making sure that you do not think. We were talking about thinking individually. And if you want to think individually, you must not be confused.
Thank you, Weiwa. Kind of staying on the topic of meritocracy, Eric, I want to come to you as an academic. You're a professor. What do you think? What do you think's the argument, I guess, for or against the attacks on meritocracy and how that relates to the bigotry of low expectations?
Excuse me. And I had another granola bar, so I'm okay now. Well, the whole point of meritocracy is to, use hierarchies, and hierarchies are bad to a lot of people, especially if you're trying to lean far left as opposed to center or even traditional left, right? So that concept has to be jettisoned, completely. The thing is, everybody has a meritocracy of some sort, right? Even if I go back to high school, the dude with the flyest outfit had the most merit. That's a meritocracy. It's a silly one, but a meritocracy nonetheless. That's how we get through. That's how we understand who can do the best job at this particular thing, who can solve this particular exigency in the most efficient way, right? We all have meritocracies. This performance that we need to get rid of meritocracies because they're inherently oppressive, that's just part of the plan. It's part of the narrative, right? And many of the people who go after meritocracies don't really think they're bad. It's just part of the narrative that they have to parrot over and over again until very many people, especially students, right, get it to the point where they know it like the back of their hands, right? Academia, obviously, is a meritocracy of sorts. If you publish more, you get more clout. If you are winning teaching awards, you get more clout. But what that does is inspire other people through extrinsic motivation, sure, but inspire other people to catch up, right? And even if you're jealous, there is a such thing as a productive form of jealousy. You know, there are some superstars out there who are superstars because initial jealousy. Michael Jordan talked about this all the time. You know, I don't want that person to be the best. I want to be the best. And look what he became. Meritocracies are gifts, right? If they're done correctly. Now, I know people are hiring their nieces and nephews, right? I know that happens. But the problem is not with meritocracy. It's with people refusing or, not living up to the concept of meritocracy. We need to change that, if anything.
Thank you. So someone asked if the ESMC, the Ethnic Studies requirement for high school students, is only for entry into the Cal State University system. That touches on two different requirements. Ethnic Studies is actually a high school graduation requirement for all public and public affiliated charter schools for California students. It's also a graduation requirement for every student in the California State University system. But I'm coming back to you on this, Eric. I'm wondering if you're seeing or have any concerns over that type of entry requirement for students that are trying to go on to college or university.
Not that I've noticed. And to be quite honest with you, that being said, I haven't really looked into, what students were taking as requirements to get into high school. College. A lot of these requirements are pretty good, so I don't want to, disparage requirements that seem like they're extracurricular or, elective in nature, right? But when it comes to certain liberating ethnic studies classes and things like that, I don't see initially the effects of that cause, right? I'm sure if I brought it up with my students, I can get some, helpful information, but I haven't done that yet.
Thank you. And David Smolansky, I'm curious, when you saw or experienced or heard about the kind of capture of the education system in Venezuela, was similar rhetoric being used as far as like these innocuous terms, liberated, things like that, to get people kind of to agree and go along with what was happening in schools?
It was it was a little bit there was some similarities. I would say that when you are under a communist regime, the focus more is to promote those ideas and to use education to every level to doctrine the students. Sorry, sometimes out of my English. The students. So, for example, just to put you a very crazy example about it, the founding father of Venezuela, Simón Bolívar, which is similar as to say George Washington in the U.S., his body was exhumated and it was rebuilt digitally. And now the face of our founding father was changed, and you can see that now on every single book on the public system and also on the public buildings of run by the state. So this is insane, right? And now people are saying, "But this is the real face of this guy, and not the one white guy that people that you were used to hear for so many years." And Simón Bolívar, our founding father, came from a up class in Caracas, and and he was our liberator, and there's no problem if that was his roots. But they changed that, and now you see even his skin color is changed due to this digital face that they created. So that's the type of perverse things that this system could do, and that happened long time ago. It was like 13 years ago. So the regime was not as it is right now.
Thank you. So another question asked is, what are the powerful political forces behind the adoption of these ideological positions? And why doesn't the legislature understand the harm of race and gender essentialist curriculum?
Maybe I'll take a stab at it. So
I'll take that one. It's time to I'll go for it.
Will David go first and then Alina?
Okay, sure. So
David Bernstein.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the people behind Liberated Ethnic Studies are a hardened group of radicals that really have extreme views on capitalism. They believe capitalism is an inherently oppressive system. They believe America and the West are the most oppressive societies in the world. They want to liberate every blade of grass in America, and believe that that in a sort of a revolutionary model. Now, this has been around for a while. It started in the late '60s in California universities, in San Francisco State University and other places that with ethnic studies curriculum that gained ground. It was called the Long March Through Institutions. So you had a group of ideologues who understood that they had to be patient, and slowly but surely their plan was they would plant seeds in universities around the country, and eventually their teachings would escape the campus and infect the larger society. And that's, I have to say, it is quite impressive. That's exactly what they've been able to do over the past 5 decades. They started slowly. They got these radical centers at various universities. They taught these ideas. They were not academic ideas. They were not open to critical reasoning. They were a form of indoctrination. Even in the university, you couldn't argue with the fundamental orientation. They in many ways, they professed it. They knew they were engaging in activism, and then they taught it over many years in many places. So now you have a whole cadre of people who are invested in this system of teaching this. And as soon as they had the chance, in the wake of the George Floyd murder, they understood that there was a chance to sort of take advantage of this moment, this racial reckoning, and they used it to impose this curriculum first in California. And they reasoned if they could get it in California, the largest, most populous state in the United States, they'd eventually be able to farm out into other areas. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. And so these are very radical people. This is not sort of the soft DEI voice. Maybe I disagree with it in a corporate setting. These are hardened ideologues, and they're the ones that are leading the way, and they're hoping to use language that disguises their motives to get it past school boards and school administrators and others. And that's exactly what they're doing. And that's why we've got to educate the public so they understand what's being proposed.
So I'll add to that we need to talk a little bit about unions, school teacher unions, and the fact that that is an organization that, in answer to the question of what are the forces in the legislature, what are the forces at the state level, that is probably the #1 force. What generally happens is it's not that the majority of teachers or even a high minority of teachers support this type of curricula. It's that generally you have 1 or 2 activists in different chapters of unions who are pushing a particular agenda, and everybody else is either not listening, not paying attention, or doesn't want to contradict them because they don't want to get into it with them. And so what happens is it is very common for teacher unions to be behind these kind of agenda-driven curricula. And when one works with state level legislature, which is often, and legislators are often in very close relationship with teacher unions, that is one of the forces that we bump up against.
Thank you both. I think I'll add that it's also, I think, easy for legislators to go along when there aren't voices that are speaking out in opposition to this, which is one of the reasons why we formed this coalition. It's so that there are voices that are more well represented in the public sphere, that are being public faces to people who are opposed to this ideology in K-12 education. Eric, did you want to add something?
Well, it's kind of tangential because I'm in higher ed and not K through 12, but accreditation organizations, I think about that often. How much of this is coming from those places being usurped by the long march through institutions, right? Saying, okay, you have to have this, that, or the other thing. You have to have a DEI person if you want to maintain your accreditation or something like that. It was pointed out to me a couple of months ago that the accreditation, the accreditors are the people we need to be looking at the higher ed level because, well, they're the people who, ironically, control the meritocracy, right, of universities and colleges. So just FYI, there's an accreditation issue too that we need to have another webinar about.
No, that's actually a really good point. And I think you're 100% right. We need to have another conversation about that. That's important. Another question. Any well-intentioned people won't understand how we could possibly have objections to teaching about power dynamics and social injustice. How can we convince them to re-embrace liberal values? Good question. You're muted, David.
I could start. I think that when people hear that they should recognize and resist systems of oppression, they say, okay, oppression is bad, so therefore we should teach kids to recognize and resist it. But what they don't understand is that this is not based on a conversation, a discussion, a debate about what constitutes oppression and who's oppressed and who's not oppressed. It's a single explanation for why there's disparity in the world that a certain ideological worldview is trying to thrust upon the rest of society. It's not an open conversation about it. It is complicated why there's disparities. Sometimes it may be a result of discrimination or oppression, but there can be other factors too. And so it's meant to say that your kids have to look at the world in this way. Now, I have to say, I totally agree with what the person asking the question is suggesting here, because I don't know exactly how to get through to people that this language, which may sound completely legit, is actually indoctrinating. It may sound okay to teach your kids to recognize systems of oppression, but you're using somebody else's definition, somebody with a very specific political agenda, who are then telling teachers what to teach kids about it. And I think that's the problem. And if there's good advice on how to message that so we get through to people, I'm all ears because we're looking for it.
Yeah, and if I can say this, these systems of oppression are not being found through some kind of methodology that's being taught, right? The students are being told this is a system of oppression. You need to knock this down, right? And that's not, again, that's indoctrination and not education. Now, if you give students various methodologies, modes of inquiry that you can have them go out into the world and do what they will, fine. But if you give them those things and say, use it for just this, right? Use it to topple, right? This is an oppressive situation. And they're abiding by the teacher's definition of that, right? And as we all know, that's not always accurate.
I'm going to add a little bit over here that when you have a institution There are so many threads coming into it. There's the accreditors, as you mentioned. There's also the education schools, which have been captured. They are trying to put themselves into a place of putting in values that shouldn't even be discussed at this level. You know, a lot of the values should belong to the families to decide. Just like you decide in your family whether you're going to take your kid to a church or a synagogue or none at all, but they should not be indoctrinating at the school level. So that's something that we have to push back on, because otherwise you cannot get the same kind of diversity. We're talking about diversity of opinion that naturally comes from what you can get in the community of your own. So school choice has to be part of the equation.
I'll just add a little bit to what everybody said, and especially Eric, building on what Eric was saying. It's absolutely not that we can't talk about oppression or systems of power. We can and we should. The difference, there are two main differences that I see in curricula that I've looked at. One is where the emphasis in a given curriculum is. So I can tell you, for example, that some curricula that we review will have as a sample size, let's say over 100 slides. So a teacher will have over 100 slides that they're presenting to the students, and you go through them slide by slide, and you see that 3 out of 100 don't have anything to do with power systems or oppression or hegemony and so on. So that says something, that says where the emphasis is. And the second part is precisely what Eric was saying, which is that it's not whether you talk about it, it's how you talk about it. You can talk about it, you should talk about it, and that applies to just about everything, but it's how you position it, how you talk about the pros and cons. How do you get to a point where we don't hear from students and parents, as we often do, that there's a right way to speak in the classroom and a wrong way, and that they're very careful to speak the right way?
Yes, David.
If I may, just quick, I come from a country that was a colony for 400 years, approximately, when the Spaniards discovered Venezuela, and then got the independence, and it's been through military dictatorships during the 19th century, and then on the 20th century, and then we got one of the most prosperous democracy in the world, and now we are again under dictatorship. When this dictatorship started with Hugo Chavez, part of its rhetoric, and having here a professor of rhetoric, he was saying this is against imperialism. This is a revolution that goes against imperialism and against any powerful country and everything. And the way it is used, that is the problem. As Elena was saying, I mean, and there are things that happen, and you just need to look at the future and how to correct that. But what you cannot do is to try to remake history, and also there's a lot of contradictions there, because this is something that goes, I think, on the communist side more against the Western values. Let's go against the US, let's go against the UK, let's go against many other countries. But I do every alliance with the China's regime, for example, or I do any alliance with other countries. So it is, as I said, it is very dangerous when this type of things are used as a tool for ideology on schools, because that's when democracy starts to be undermined, and the consequences could be tragic.
Thank you. I think that right now it may be a good time, Dan, to show the slide showing who all of our coalition partners are. So here's a slide that gives who we're working with through part of our Coalition for Empowered Education. And you again can find more information on our website. It's at empowered-ed.org. And there's also a contact page on there if you have further questions or comments. Right now at this point, Alina, I think I'm going to turn it over to you so you can briefly tell everyone what they can do if they want to join us, if they want more information. and a little bit more about, again, about what we're doing as part of this coalition.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brandy. Daniel, could we have the last slide in the PowerPoint, whose title is What Can We Do? Just take a second while Daniel pulls that up, and we'll go through what can any of you do, or organizations that you are associated with. And I will actually, I think I will start talking while Daniel pulls that up, and then it'll be easier to see the full thing. So the number one thing you can do is learn more. Information is everything. Learn more about the topics, learn more about the coalition partners, all these amazing organizations that you see as part of the coalition, and more. Go to the coalition's website and learn more about the work of these organizations and learn more about what's going on out there. Ask about the status of ethnic studies and really just about any curricula, but particularly ethnic studies and social studies curricula. Ask about, are they being changed? What's being changed about them? Express your concerns. Urge that your school or your district adopt a positive, empowered, constructive, whatever you want to call it, approach to ethnic studies. Develop relationships with school principals, with district superintendents, with board elected officials. Develop these relationships so that you can ask the questions going forward. Go to local district school board meetings, go to legislature meetings, go to whatever meetings you had, get information, speak if you feel that you have something to say. Join district and school curriculum committees. Those are easy to join a lot of times, and they make a difference. How are these decisions made? They're by people just like you and I. Talk to other parents, talk to teachers to spread the word, and absolutely let us know. I put in the chat the contact information from me for ACEs. There's also information about the coalition itself. Any of us can help if you are interested in starting a group and forming a group of you. If you are so inclined, write letters to the editor. Oh, we lost our slide. Daniel, can you go back to it? Write letters to the editor or op-eds to local, state, national newspapers. There's a toolkit. If you go to the ACES website, there's also a toolkit there that tells you lots of different things that you could do, how to communicate with different types of people. Forward our updates. You will start getting updates. Those of you that are interested and sign up, please do, and you'll start getting updates. Please forward them on, because part of this is spreading the word. And most importantly, possibly right at this moment, we would love to know if you are with an organization that could join, or if they could join this coalition, or if you can recommend groups that can join that we should be talking to, because we need your input on that. Daniel, you can take us off the PowerPoint. And I just wanted to say a couple more words. So what we're talking about, I know we talked quite a bit about California, but this is happening, as I'm sure many of you know, throughout the country. It is not a coincidence that these agenda-driven curricula start in California. California often drives curricula. But as I mentioned before, there are over 20 states that now have some version of what we've been talking about rolling through them. So whatever you choose to do, any of these list of things, I'm urging you to do something. You want to focus on lawsuits, I saw there was conversation about that, then by all means, don't just talk about it. Go talk to legal firms, talk to organizations that can help you. If you don't think that's the way to go, or not now, and you'd rather advocate with legislators, then do that. If you want to talk to administrators, then do that. What we're talking about here is literally nothing short of how the next generation functions in the world and what they make of the world. So we just can't afford to close our eyes. Please join all of us in some way and do something. And I'm very grateful for you spending your time with us.
Thank you for that, Alina. I also want to mention on the coalition website, you can find more information. You can find not just of what we're doing, but a recently released report that goes into more detail about exactly what we're talking about, the concerns that we have about ethnic studies, and it's titled California Ethnic Studies from Radical Roots to Government Mandate. And read through that. And if you have questions about it, please feel free to contact us. There's a contact form on our website. And we're happy that you all joined us and hope that this is just the beginning and the first step of us working together. Thank you.
Thank you so much.